Hey everyone, I just played Agent A, and it was a much needed palate cleanser. Developed by yak&co and released in 2019, it's a puzzle-based point-and-click adventure where you play as Agent A, super spy, infiltrating the coastal mansion of Ruby LaRouge, an operative of Havoc, to bring her to justice before she takes out any more members of MIA. It's got style, it's got smarts, and surprisingly, it's got pretty high stakes too. It might look like a Saturday morning cartoon, but Agent A isn't afraid to get its hands dirty, so let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, if you enjoy the video and want to help the channel grow, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, share it around, let me know what you think in the comments, and why not go check out some of my other stuff. And if you really enjoyed, you can join the handful of people generously supporting me on Patreon and Ko-Fi. Links are in the description. Also, there are going to be mild mechanical spoilers throughout the video. Okay, let's get to it. Agent A is quick to get going. As soon as your briefing's done, the chief of MIA is blown up along with everyone else aboard this ship as Ruby makes a quiet escape to her island getaway. And then it's puzzles pretty much all the way down. The game's Steam page boasts 100 brain ticklers, and I believe it, but what's more impressive is how varied they are. There are very few repeats, and when they do pop up, it's almost always complemented with an added layer of complexity. The puzzle variety is so good that I actually wish one or two of them came back for an encore, like trying to clear a path in this power box. Sure, some of the puzzles in that round 100 are pretty simple, as easy as knocking a bottle in a bathroom cabinet over to flip a switch, or smashing a light bulb with a hammer, but those are the exception. The vast majority of the puzzles in Agent A need you to be paying attention. There are hints and key items hidden all over Ruby's mansion. There's no easy way to brute force past any part of it unless that's what the game wants. A lot of them may not be particularly difficult. Even the late game puzzles look more threatening than they actually are once you've figured out the key to solving them, but they are definitely engaging. At one point you use a magnet to guide a key through an underwater maze on the other side of some glass. At another you have to align a bunch of dials by freezing them one row or column at a time. There are piano puzzles, patterns to draw on a chessboard. One puzzle requires you to input the solutions backwards because the wall it's attached to has to spin around in order to complete it. Another gives you the code on the wall of the lighthouse outside, but the keypad gets damaged when you break through the glass to reach it, forcing you to figure out what button now corresponds to which number. And that's barely scratching the surface of what Agent A has to offer. But what stood out to me most is how good Agent A is at bringing elements from earlier chapters back in new and interesting ways. You need to distract Ruby's cat to get an item in Chapter 1, but it becomes important again later in Chapter 4. You accidentally send this jetpack shooting up through the ceiling at one point, and as the game goes on, you'll keep running into it wherever it's crashed. You need to open up this post box early on to get a key, but you'll need it again when Ruby receives a package later in the game. Puzzles and items and areas you thought you'd completed come back later on all throughout Agent A. It's not just puzzle after puzzle after puzzle, it's an interconnected web of areas and items that's paced out in terms of complexity and density really well. Chapters 1 and 2 are more open, more freeform in their pacing, but Chapter 3 is basically a big extended escape room saw trap puzzle box in a confined space. It's the closest Agent A comes to a self-contained area, but it still reuses elements from Chapter 3 across the rest of the game, and it's rare to see that done so well through mechanics. As much thought was clearly given to where each puzzle should go in the context of the plot as the mechanics of the puzzles themselves. The way they're integrated into each other is really impressive too. Solving one puzzle usually nets you an item or a code that leads to the solution of the next, and there are generally enough in any given area that it's hard to get stuck at a choke point. You always have the option of coming back to it later after spending some time on something else. It's not always obvious what items go with what puzzle, or where the environmental hints will come in handy, but when it clicks, it's so satisfying. Aside from the puzzles, Agent A has a big focus on exploration. Pretty much everything in the game can be interacted rewarded with, even if it only gets you a Bondian quip from Agent A, even if it's not actually part of a puzzle. You can knock this chair over in Ruby's office, but it doesn't do anything, it's just for fun. A red herring even, given the game hides so many key items and switches behind interactive objects like pillows and chairs. There's a surprising amount of stuff to do that's completely unrelated to beating the game as well, like how you can overflow the sink in Ruby's bathroom by clicking on the plug hole while the water's running, or how you can catch a fish for Ruby's cat, or have a whole conversation with whatever this fucking thing is. It might not be as deep as something like Bubba Is You, but it gives Agent A so much more depth than you might expect from a mere puzzle game. Unfortunately, the exploration is also the game's one stumbling point. None of the transitions between areas are all that long, but as Agent A goes on and you unlock more of Ruby's hideout, having to cycle through so many rooms gets old real quick. From Chapter 4 onward, I think the game would have benefited from some sort of fast travel system between already visited areas, because so many transitions one after another can really flatten the mood. It gets really bad in some places where you still have to pass through certain rooms that previously only featured a single puzzle blocking your way into a new area. It would have been much smoother to just skip over it once it was completed. I probably would never have noticed if the game weren't so stylish. Agent A takes place in a three-dimensional world, but the art style gives it the feel of something 2D, like a cartoon right out of the 1960s. The game makes such clever use of camera placement and set decoration that it's almost impossible to tell you're looking at a 3D environment until some part of it starts moving. Like the puzzles, it feels very deliberate, and it must have been in order to cram in so many hints and items with such density. The art style does a great job of conveying what's important and what's just set dressing too. There's never a point in the game where you're forced to go pixel hunting. Everything that should pop, does pop. It even does a pretty good job of integrating actual 2D images into the 3D environment too. Ruby's cat is the rare exception, but whenever the femme fatale herself shows up on the scene, it's hard to imagine a more seamless integration of 2D and 3D, even when in motion. Far out, everything about this game is so sleek and smooth. The animations are so nice to look at. I don't even care that much about the puzzles. I just want to see more of the world, especially when it changes so much across the course of the game. Just as the puzzles build across each area of Ruby's hideout, so too does the damage you deal to the mansion. You're not so much picking the locks to her secret lair, you're smashing the windows and knocking down the walls. It's great. The sound is pretty stylish too. There's not much music, but what's there is the sort of smooth spy thriller jazz you'd expect from a game like this. There's only one track that plays in the background of gameplay, but it's mixed low enough to be unobtrusive. I never found it to be repetitive. It's only during cinematics and right at the very end of the game that the music ratchets up in intensity, but given things never get all that action-packed outside those moments, that's perfectly fine. The voice acting is pretty great too, though there's sparingly little. The Chief's voice is exactly the sort of stuffy upper-class handler you want in a spy thriller. The guy sounds like he stepped right out of Evil Genius into this game.
Good evening, Agent A. Your new mission is in from headquarters. Meet Ruby LaRouge, an enemy spy who we believe is targeting our secret agents.
And Ruby finds the perfect balance between playful and predatory, like a cat torturing a mouse it's caught before getting around to the kill.
Now the world will see just how incompetent you and MIA really are. Au revoir, Agent A.
Act accents do slip once or twice, but it's not a deal breaker. If anything, I wish there was more voice acting. Cheesy as Agent A's quips can be, I think they would have benefited from being spoken aloud in a send-up of one of the classic Bonds. I get it though, voice acting is expensive, and if Agent A was fully voiced, they'd have by far the most dialogue in the game, but the one-liners just don't land as well when they're reduced to text. Seeing these trees makes me want to go tree punching. I mean hiking. Okay, maybe that's a bad example, but do you understand what I'm getting at? Let me try another.
Whoa, I totally just hacked that circuit board.
You know what, maybe I'm wrong about this, let's move on. Where the audio really excels is the sound effects. Everything is so crisp and clean, locks rattle and clank. Buttons click and clack. Guns roar. This thing screams. And as for the piano... It's a feast for the ears, and it keeps the puzzles engaging even when you haven't solved them. Sound design this good is worth being stuck for a little bit. The little ting whenever you pick up an item or solve a puzzle was flawless. It's so fucking good, I could listen to this shit for days. That said, the presentation isn't perfect. There was one instance of flashing lights that I noticed during the ending, and this doorway late in the game kept flashing in and out of the Shadow Realm, but those were the only two issues I found. The cinematics are also very obviously pre-rendered, though that's not really a huge issue, it's just a nitpick. I wonder if you'll even be able to tell through YouTube's compression. Probably not. It's the story that really brings the whole experience together. I've played puzzle games before with stories, but they've always been framing devices, gentle suggestions to give context to what's going on. Not so with Agent A. Like any spy thriller worth its salt, the story is front and center. There's actual pacing to it. The action ebbs and flows like the tide until it all climaxes in a frantic set-piece escape that brings the whole thing to a satisfying close. Here's something you don't get to say about many puzzle games. The plot twists kept me guessing. I was invested in what was going on. I didn't just want to stop Ruby for the extra puzzles. I wanted to stop her because she's a piece of shit. Someone who's as easy to hate as she is to watch and go. God damn, she's smooth. She's a lot smarter than most villains of the genre too. Given the game's cartoony art style, I expected the tone to be equally Saturday 60s morning. But no, Ruby doesn't fuck about. She's playing for keeps. She tries to kill you multiple times across the game, and when push comes to shove, she doesn't wait around to gloat about her inevitable success. She just shoots you. She's on her A-game right from the opening cinematic when she sinks a whole ship of innocent people, and the few mistakes she does make don't feel like they come from the usual place of Bond villain stupidity. It's honestly refreshing to see the weird mix of oddball goofiness and deathly seriousness from the genre's heyday make a return. It's just also very odd that it comes in the form of a puzzle game and not, you know, another incredible sequel. It's also definitely a contrast to the rest of the writing. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek jokes and reference humour poking fun at the spy thriller genre. At one point you find a whole list of MIA agent names that are nothing but really bad puns. But there's also a lot of asides that do feel like Saturday morning cartoon stuff, and the two don't really mesh together very well. Like you can be wandering around Ruby's mansion making quips at all the interactive objects, and then find a telescope to look out at the wreckage of the ship Ruby blew up in the opening cinematic. Oh. You can hang out with Trevor the Mouse, the best character in the game, God I love him, and then go right on back to escaping the high-stakes saw trap puzzle box Ruby's locked you in. Oh, one thing I've only come to appreciate about the original Incredibles as an adult is how well that movie balances high-stakes, serious adult drama with fun family action, and when I look at Agent A, I see the same thing being done. It's just ever so slightly rough around the edges. Don't get me wrong, I love it for that. I wish we still got more stuff like this. Family-friendly works that aren't afraid to get a little serious and a little dark. What I'm saying is, Agent A is just a little clunky. I'm not surprised yak&co's following game, Down in Bermuda, settled on a much more even tone, but I'm also not surprised it didn't grab me as much as Agent A still does. The writing is another reason I wish Agent A was fully voiced. It would be expensive, and it would result in a lot of groan-worthy moments from the audience, I'm certain, but the character feels a little lacking without it. Silent protagonists work best when they never say a word, when they're little more than a costume for the player to wear while playing the game, but Agent A is an absolute chatterbox. They have thoughts and opinions on everything. They have a history and an established character. They have pre-existing relationships with other people. They have a voice, even if it's only conveyed through text. They're not a mold for the player to be poured into. They're a role to play with cues to hit, dialogue to speak, and script directions to follow. And something is missing from the game without their voice. The player is given a little leeway in projecting themselves into the character, if only by virtue of the fact you never see Agent A's face, or even learn their gender, not so far as I could tell anyway. And aside from how expensive it would be to record all that dialogue, this is the only reason I could think of to keep them silent. But I still think it's a missed opportunity, even if the finished game as it exists is still perfectly fine without it. It's a rare treat when a game is able to integrate its story so well into its mechanics, and that more than makes up for the lack of any dialogue on Agent A's part. Like any good spy thriller, Agent A ends with a big explosion and a sequel hook, and I hope it eventually gets one. It's not just an excellent puzzle game, it's an excellent story, all wrapped up in a cool 1960s aesthetic. Other puzzle games might do individual concepts better, or with greater depth, but I don't think I've ever played a puzzle game that does so many different things so well. It won't set you back years of your life like Bubba Is You or The Witness. Both of my playthroughs have clocked in at a tight 3 hours, but it won't outstay its welcome either. If you're a fan of the genre, you owe it to yourself to pick it up and play it. In the future, whenever I find myself free on a lazy Sunday afternoon and want something to stimulate the brain a little, Agent A is definitely a game I'll be coming back to. You might even say, it's amazing! Fucking Christ. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting the channel with $5 US a month or more on Patreon: Azazel, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Roughbelly, Sarah Bloomer, Sneezy McGlassface, and Werner Goring. Thank you so much. And shout out to the legend who left a tip on Ko-Fi, you know who you are. So since I'm working on so many big projects at the moment, I was determined to keep this video short, and I can't believe I actually did it. It's a very pre-Christmas miracle. Anyway, the next review is going to be about another genre throwback, though it's a little more violent than Agent A. Watch out for that in October. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. I am the god of water. Flow, flow, my watery minion. Nah, this isn't gonna work.
I totally just hacked that circuit board! Wow, I totally just hacked that circuit board!